Early this year, one of the longest-running animated series of all time finished airing new episodes. Since it premiered on PBS in 1996, Arthur has entertained many children with its stories of characters learning life lessons. The premise of the series does not seem all that different from other slice-of-life shows about young characters. However, revisiting several episodes after not having seen the show in about 20 years, I was reminded what made it so appealing. Arthur originated in a series of books written by Mark Brown. In the first book, Arthur's Nose, published in 1976, he looked more like a typical aardvark. However, as Brown continued to develop the characters in later books, his design evolved into the one we're all familiar with. Rewatching the television show, what struck me is how cleverly written the series is. While there was certainly a message in all of the episodes, Brown the writers came up with entertaining stories to accompany them. All the characters are properly defined, and it does not take long to understand their personalities and who they are. The characters are quite three-dimensional too. Arthur is portrayed as a typical 8-year-old, albeit with a love for reading, and the show did showcase his flaws several times. The show was able to populate Elwood City with several notable characters, including Arthur's best friend Buster, the bossy Francine, the rich Muffy, the teacher Mr. Ratburn, and several others. Each stood out and proved memorable, the writers not opting for simple characterizations. A good example of this is with Binky Barnes. Another show would have written him as the typical bully who always messes with Arthur and his friends. However, the writers depicted another side to him, and while he does present a tough exterior at several points, that was not his only trait. An especially pivotal character in the show is Arthur's younger sister, DW. Apparently there's a segment of the Arthur fanbase who considers her annoying and bratty. Not me. I think the writers gave her the best and funniest lines in the show, as well as some of the most entertaining episodes. They managed to have her look at the world through an imaginative 4-year-old's perspective and taking minor things and making them into a big deal. One of the funniest episodes has her constantly listen to an annoying children's song on a loop, which drives Arthur nuts. The fact that the episode plays the song over and over and over again just makes it all the more hilarious. There's also the episode where DW imitates Arthur, right down to his clothes, which is also extremely funny. When DW gets irritated about something, she gets so savage. I think they were able to not cross that line to make her too bratty and instead depict her as a typical young child who's upset about eating a particular food or her older brother not wanting to play with her. All the characters on the show are anthropomorphic animals, although this was not something that was addressed too much by the characters. Arthur has a pet dog named Pal, even though walking and talking dogs do exist in this universe. So we're basically operating on goofy Pluto logic here. It's best not to think too much about it. However, making them animals was a smart choice on Mark Brown's part. It was another reason the series stood out from other similar shows like Doug. The episodes addressed a decent variety of topics and managed to tackle them in a way that was not too derivative of other children's series that focus on these as well. For example, there's an episode where DW learns a swear word. This is a common storyline in shows aimed at a young audience, with a sound effect usually heard in place of the word. However, Arthur found its own angle, with DW trying to figure out the word's meaning, but is worried about asking her parents. They explore the concept of swearing and why these words have such a major effect on people in a clever manner. The show was even willing to tackle more serious themes. One of the most highly regarded episodes is April 9th, about a fire that breaks out at the school. This was made in response to the September 11th attacks, and sought to show children it was okay to react a certain way to this tragedy. The episode shows how Arthur, Buster, Sue Ellen, and Binky all feel about this event, each having a different effect. Binky's is especially important, as he develops PTSD from the fire and tries to hide it before eventually learning that this is an understandable response and nothing to be ashamed of. Another oft-talked-about episode is Arthur's Big Hit. This is infamously known as the episode where Arthur hits DW, and does a good job of showing why it's wrong to hit people. Although I've actually read comments from people who say Arthur was right to hit DW. Way to miss the entire point of the story. One episode that has especially become relevant is one where Buster finds out that he's responsible for spreading germs everywhere. Upon learning this, he becomes a germaphobe, but takes things too far. Although considering the last few years, maybe Buster wasn't too off with his careful handling of food and frequently washing his hands. Something that struck me when watching the show was the emphasis it placed on television. While Arthur is a bookworm, we also see how he and his friends view television as an important tool. He's a fan of a superhero show titled Bionic Bunny, while DW gravitates towards preschool shows like Mary Moo Cow, which is basically the Barney the Dinosaur of this universe. One of the most memorable episodes of the series is The Contest. It centers on the characters coming up with stories to submit to a television show, with all of them parodying an actual series, including South Park and Beavis and Butthead. The fact that they were allowed to obviously parody shows not appropriate for Arthur's target demographic is quite remarkable. Then again, Sesame Street has made references to more grown-up programming for years. It also says something about South Park and Beavis and Butthead's place in popular culture that even I understood what this episode was referencing despite not watching those shows as a child. Arthur became popular enough that it landed some major celebrity guest stars who appeared as themselves. Some notable ones included Fred Rogers, Matt Damon, and Lance Armstrong, although PBS doesn't like to acknowledge that last one. An aspect that Arthur also excelled in was the music. The theme song went for a reggae sound, which added to the catchiness of the tune. The various songwriters came up with other memorable songs, including one where Brain becomes fascinated with the story of Jekyll and Hyde, and another one about the importance of having a library card. Let me repeat that. The Arthur songwriters composed a really catchy tune about library cards. That's how good they were. For most of Arthur's run, the animation was provided by the Canadian studio CNR, which would also outsource to ACOM in Korea. They brought a pleasing quality to the look of the series, including the backgrounds. In 2012, 9 Story took over production of Arthur, with the animation switching over to Flash. For those familiar with the classic episodes, it can be jarring to see the characters at first, although the animators did retain the designs as much as possible. I did get used to it after a while, and even though the animation was changed, the writing remained clever along with the ability to tackle certain themes. In 2016, Oasis Animation replaced 9 Story, although they continued using Flash. For the voice of Arthur, they used actual young actors to play the role, so his voice has gone through several changes over the years, although Michael Yamush did it the longest and is thus the most recognized voice. Brain similarly had multiple voice actors, as did DW, who's actually always been voiced by boys. Most of the other characters, though, had the same actor for the entire run of the show, including Daniel Brochu as Buster, Jodie Rester as Francine, and Melissa Outro as Muffy. Something I had no idea until I started researching for this video was that Arthur's father and Binky had the same voice actor, Bruce Dinsmore. I never picked up on that before. Meanwhile, Arthur Holden provided his distinct voice for Mr. Ratburn. I remember when he showed up on screen as a radio announcer in Martin Scorsese's The Aviator, I immediately knew who he was. That's how recognizable his voice is. Someone who deserves an enormous amount of credit for the success of Arthur is Greg Bailey. His contributions to earlier CNR animated series, like The Busy World of Richard Scarry, is what helped the studio land the deal to make Arthur, and Bailey would serve as the principal director of the series for its entire run, even after CNR stopped working on it. Finally, after 25 seasons, it was announced Arthur would stop producing new episodes. It says something that when this was revealed, an outpouring of adoration came from people who remembered watching the series as children. That really shows the impact it had, making it understandable why it stayed on the air for so long. The final episode, All Grown Up, was a touching way to end the series. The story involved Arthur and his friends coming across a board game which predicts their future. We then flash forward several years later to the characters as adults, with Arthur revealing the book he has written, which happens to be Arthur's Eyes, the very first episode of the series. It was a nice way to bring things full circle, and as an added bonus, not only does Mark Brown make a guest appearance, but Michael Yamush returned to voice Arthur in the last scene. It can be difficult to make a perfectly satisfying series finale, but in the case of Arthur, the way they chose to finish it just felt right, and I actually found it quite emotional. Arthur was a show I enjoyed watching a lot as a child, to the point I had a couple of episodes on VHS, and I'm really happy to see that not only does it still hold up really well, but that continued to bring joy to children of later generations. Everyone involved in the creation and production of Arthur put together something truly remarkable, and I want to thank the entire team for making the show what it is, especially Mark Brown and Greg Bailey. Let me know in the comments about your own memories of Arthur, and I'll see you next time.